Hey, estate planning attorney Paul Rabelais here, and in this video we're going to talk about whether an LLC helps protect assets from the old nursing home spin down. So I get asked almost every day about different strategies that people are considering implementing to try to protect their assets from having to sell and spend and consume those assets on their nursing home expenses. People want to try to arrange their estate to qualify for Medicaid. So among the things discussed in order to start the 5-year look-back period is oftentimes outright transfers to family members, and a lot of discussion about transfers to various types of trusts. Some people, though, they ask if it's legal, if it's allowable, if it helps for a parent, for example, who's trying to protect their assets for their children. Sometimes parents ask, can we transfer our assets to an LLC and protect them? So I want to take a look at that. All right, so first let's cover the very basics. LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. It's just a pet peeve of mine when I sit across the table from someone who I can tell they want to talk about how much knowledge they have about LLCs, and they call an LLC a limited liability corporation. It's not a limited liability corporation, it's a limited liability company. So just a pet peeve of mine, if you're ever in a bar, in a barber shop, whatever, talking LLCs, make sure you use the term limited liability company. So limited, and I'm gonna refer to them as LLCs from here on out. So LLCs are really common for people who own a small business and they don't want to be personally responsible for debts of the business. And LLCs are great as opposed to sole proprietorship, where there is no limited liability. And LLCs are favored typically over corporations because there's just more bureaucratic red tape involved with corporations, and LLCs are more popular for small business than partnerships because partnerships don't provide that limited liability. So LLCs are really, really common. Now, LLCs are also really, really common for people who own land or rental property, and they owned that rental property or land inside of their LLC. Again, all designed to give that property owner or LLC owner more liability protection than they would have if they just owned that property in their name. So, those are some common ways. Now, I'm going to come back to the LLC in a minute, but let's shift to the protect stuff from nursing home feature. I would say the most common way for people to get assets out of their name for nursing home purposes, or you could say start that 5-year penalty period or 5-year look back period, is transfers to a particular type of an irrevocable trust. Very common type is what I'll call the irrevocable income only trust. It's where people get assets out of their name for nursing home purposes, but assets are still theirs for income tax purposes because the person the parent or parents who transferred their assets to one of these irrevocable income only trusts, they're often what's called the income beneficiaries of the trust, and the children are what's called the principal beneficiaries of the trust. Many parents like this because the parents still get the income that the trust assets produce, and as a result of that, their children have no income tax consequences as a result of the parents transferring their assets to one of these types of trusts. And the children are the principal beneficiaries of the trust. They're the ones who are entitled to own the trust assets after the parents pass away, but there's no tax consequences to the children while the parents are alive. So many parents like the flexibility of that arrangement, and that's just kind of scratch the surface explanation of how trusts are used in Medicaid eligibility planning. So now let's take a look at how an LLC might be different. So let me give an example. Let's say parents owned or they own some land, maybe they own some publicly traded stock, maybe they own some rental property, perhaps they own some CDs or savings accounts at the bank, and they want to try to protect that, preserve it for themselves and ultimately for their children. They don't really plan on consuming that stuff during their lifetime. They just want to kind of park it somewhere where they don't lose it if they get sick and have to go to a nursing home. So they transfer those assets to an LLC. Now, I would say initially when they do that, the parents are the owners of the LLC. Owners of LLCs are called members. So the parents are the members of the LLC, and maybe the parents have designated in their will or in some type of revocable living trust that the children are to receive those assets when the parents pass away. But that transaction by itself, where the parents create an LLC and transfer assets that are in the parent's name into this newly created or maybe even already existing LLC, that doesn't protect the assets from the parent's future nursing home expenses, because now instead of the parents owning all of the assets, the parents merely own a company that owns all of the assets. And in our Medicaid manual, it clearly states that that's an asset, that's a countable resource if the parents own or if the parents are the members of the LLC. That's an asset that would have to be spent down. So the transferring assets to an LLC of which this potential future Medicaid applicant is the member or is a member of the LLC, that doesn't give one any kind of nursing home asset protection. Now, let's take it a step further. Now, let's say the parents decide, you know what, let's make our children the owners or members of this LLC. Now, in general, that would start the 5-year look-back period or 5-year penalty period that the parents would not then have a membership or ownership interest in that LLC. They had transferred all of that to their children. Let's say, they had 4 children. They gave each child a 25% membership interest in that LLC. And now the parents retained no ownership, no control, no rights in that LLC. So transferring an LLC to the children accomplishes the same effect as transferring assets outright to the children or transferring assets to one of these particular types of irrevocable trusts. So now, but when the parents do transfer ownership of their LLC or membership in their LLC to their children, then all future income that the LLC produces would be taxed to the children. So now the children have income tax consequences as a result of the parents transferring their membership interest to the children. And with the parents retaining no ownership rights in this LLC, the parents are really kind of giving up control over what happens to the LLC assets, because those members, the children, now can vote to change the operating agreement and change how the LLC may be structured and how it may operate. So parents are really losing any control that they may have had by transferring their ownership or membership interest to their children. So most people prefer the flexibility that trusts provide, making the children the principal beneficiaries, making the parents the income beneficiaries, and that's what preserves that principle or preserves those assets for the children to get at a later date, perhaps when the parents pass away. Now, it's a good question as to whether an LLC kind of protects assets from the nursing home. And occasionally there's a scenario where the children or heirs should be the owners or members of an LLC. But we don't see people using LLCs as the entity of choice when trying to protect those assets from future nursing home expenses. So anyway, there you have it. Make sure that you hit the like button, smash it, turn it gray to blue. That helps. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, make sure you hit the red subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you won't miss anything. Good question. Can LLCs protect assets from the nursing home? Answer to most of these questions that I bring up is it depends. And so we have to take an in-depth look at it. There you have it. We'll see you next time.